All right. Thank you, Matthias. Thank you, Maxon. How's it going? My name is John LePore. I'm super excited to be talking to everybody today. I work at a studio called Perception based in New York, where I'm a principal and the chief creative director. We do all sorts of fun stuff over at Perception. I'm really excited to talk to you today about some of the ways that we use Cinema 4D, particularly when we're leveraging it for the purpose of designing futuristic user interfaces. So first, let me really quickly just give you a quick background on Perception and what we do. Studio is this year celebrating its 20th year in business. Like I said, we're based in New York. We've got an awesome team of multidisciplinary designers ranging from everywhere from 3D to 2D to user experience, but almost all of them have some degree of Cinema 4D experience. And everyone in our studio is applying their capabilities towards a very specific and unique focus that we have at Perception. When we talk about this unique focus, we always describe it as kind of having two paths or parallel worlds. And what I mean when I say that is what we do is we spend about 50% of our time doing creative development for film, and 50% of our time doing design for next generation technologies. So what do I mean when I'm talking about creative development for film? We're finding ourselves working on some of the biggest movies that are being made, doing all sorts of design-focused tasks, designing special sequences, designing title sequences, and particularly focusing on this concept of designing futuristic visions of technologies that can populate these worlds. We love working in this space. It's something that we take unbelievably seriously. And to give you a better sense as to the kind of work that we're doing in the world of film, I'll play through this montage of a bunch of our different projects in film. So the kind of work that we're doing is probably best known for designing futuristic interfaces seen throughout the world of Wakanda in the film Black Panther. That work extended not just from designing futuristic interfaces, but also to designing special sequences in the film, like an opening storytelling sequence, as well as the film's closing title sequence. We've designed all sorts of different future tech for films like Thor Ragnarok and many other Marvel superhero films. We love doing that kind of work. We love taking a really serious approach to the way that technology can really help give viewers a better understanding of what's happening in these worlds, in these fictional films, and how we can help to bring those ideas and concepts to life. We do also love working on title sequences for some of these same films, which give us some really fun opportunities from a very open-ended design perspective. So I'll jump back into cinema, and I want to talk to you a little more about the other side of our business, which is this idea of creating concepts for real-world technologies. You can certainly imagine there being a bit of overlap between this idea of designing futuristic tech that is seen in fiction, whether that's the work that we're doing for film, for television, or even for gaming, and that then being applied to real-world technologies. It's something that we love doing. It's something that we also take really seriously. There's a lot of interesting challenges that come with that when you're designing stuff, not just to be fantastical and exciting on screen, but to really be something that can help improve someone's life, make certain tasks easier, be something that's very intuitive to interact with. And there's this whole other process under the hood beyond just the visual aesthetics that have to be considered when you're designing concepts for real-world technologies. And so there's a few different sort of things that I think we've worked on in the past that are really great examples of how we do work in this space. We've found ourselves working on a lot of emerging technologies, things like the Microsoft HoloLens and various other implementations of augmented reality and virtual reality. We've worked on consumer products like helping to design the entire operating system for the Samsung Galaxy phones, and even worked on exotic supercars like the 2017 Ford GT. It was really fun to work on this car, which is like an absolute Ferrari killer, and design things like the digital instrumentation that appears in a vehicle like this. We've been doing all sorts of exciting work in the vertical of automotive, including designing all the digital systems seen in the brand new electric Hummer that will be coming out in 2022. And I'll talk a little more about some fun stuff related to the Hummer EV as we're going along. So I want to just touch briefly on what Cinema 4D means to perception and why we find ourselves using this platform. We consider Cinema 4D to be a designer's 3D tool. It's something that we think lends itself towards the process of design and rapid fire creation, as opposed to some of the more cumbersome aspects of maybe a more complex 3D pipeline. We find Cinema 4D to be really accessible and easy, which is great for people who are just trying to figure out how to flesh out certain ideas. But at the same time, if you want to go really deep with it, Cinema 4D will do that as well. And there's so many members of our team that get really deep into every different aspect of Cinema 4D, various plugins, various rendering engines, and taking advantage of this tool in every different way that is possible. Now, for me, I'm not even coming close to doing that. I'm still, I've been using Cinema 4D for close to 20 years, and I'm embarrassed to say that I'm still just barely scratching the surface of it. But you'll see as I'm going through some of the concepts and some of the ideas that I'll be talking about, how even with a very primitive knowledge of how to utilize Cinema 4D, you can still make some really exciting and really beautiful images. And so what I want to talk to you about today is this idea that I'm referring to as the FUI FAQ, and touching on some really core fundamental ideas of designing futuristic user interfaces and how those can be applied to your process using Cinema 4D. All of these ideas that I'm going to talk about are very easy to execute. They're also using some of the most basic features of Cinema 4D. But the core foundation or the thought that's driving them applies to any other aspect of Cinema 4D or many other tools as well that can be leveraged. And so if you're deep into leveraging, Redshift, you'll be able to do some things that take these ideas even further. If you're well established in using the take systems or node-based material editing and whatnot, you'll be able to take some of these core ideas that I'm going to touch on and go even further with them. But for today, and also just for my own purposes, I'm going to keep it pretty basic and pretty simple and straightforward. So with all that said, I want to jump into a scene that I've been putting together and preparing to kind of talk through how we can work with this. And so what I wanted to do was use this model of a Hummer EV that I've got here and look at ways that we can create a really beautiful, really interesting, and really exciting holographic view of this vehicle in a way that will feel like it's straight out of a futuristic interface that we've seen in film. So to start off, one of the key things that I'll touch on is the idea of just how can we look at the shape and form and general composition of the vehicle and use that as a starting point for what kind of elements we can add or integrate into this. It's really important to me whenever we're working with a cool object or model, whether that's a vehicle like this or a robotic suit or something like that, that whatever we're adding to it is complementing the shapes and forms and the physical presence of that element. And so I love the Hummer EV because it's got some beautiful lines to it. It's got some really interesting shapes and forms that immediately feel futuristic and evocative of something cinematic. And if you look around and you look in a place even in the truck bed of the Hummer EV, there's this beautiful detailed patterning that's happening in there. We sometimes will refer to this kind of added detail as a greeble, a sort of almost superfluous detail that just adds a sense of visual complexity and maybe makes something look a little more complete or a little more sophisticated. So one of the first things that I want to do looking at the Hummer EV is I want to just really quickly do let me just do a screenshot of this. We'll do a quick poor man's render of this, and I'm going to jump into Illustrator, and what we're going to do is take that screenshot that I just made. We'll bring that into Illustrator, and we'll use that for reference. I'm going to turn the transparency on this way down, and first thing that I want to do is just look at this vehicle and think about, hey, how can we emphasize some of the beautiful forms that are in this car? And one of the lines, one of the sort of like contours that stands out to me the most is this difference between the white body and the black cladding that goes along the bottom of the car, but then steps upwards around the wheel arches that are around the vehicle. And so adding a piece of line work in here that could maybe, be highlighted or traced could look really cool and interesting. So what do we do with this? Well, we could add a little more visual interest to this by making this a dotted line, and that, makes it a little more intriguing. Let me turn off my grid so you can see this just a little bit better, but it's still not that interesting. So what I'm going to do is a process and a technique that I love to use. I always turn on my grid and my snapping to the grid, and I'm going to make some line work here that we can maybe look at somehow being implemented into the shape or form of the Hummer EV. I'm going to turn off the dashed line, and I'm thinking also about some of those diagonal lines that I saw in the truck bed and the way that those elements kind of like branched out and had this almost like X formation to them. So I'm going to copy paste this and just kind of mirror it really quickly, slide it over like this. Let's take this element, copy paste it in place and nudge it down like this. Let's duplicate this piece and drag it over here. I like how these angled lines, I didn't even mean for this to happen, but they're starting to make it look almost like the H in the Hummer logo. And then just for some extra detail, I'm going to add one more bit of line work here. And this line, I'm going to increase the thickness of the stroke. Let's pump that up to about 3 points just to add a little bit of visual contrast. Let's punch that down here. Get everything looking relatively symmetrical. And we'll flip this over to the other side as well. See how we can make this look nice and consistent. And so this interesting shape that I've got going on here, what we're going to do with this is we are going to create a custom brush in Illustrator. This is a technique I use all the time. I love doing this. You go over here into the brush palette and you go to new brush. We're going to make a pattern brush, say okay, and that's it. It is made a brush. It's over here in this brush palette. What's going to happen now is I select this boring dotted line. I hit the brush palette. It creates total chaos. Let me undo that for a second. We were getting some nasty overshoots on that, but that can be solved by just rounding the edges of this just a little bit. So I'm going to do that. Okay, and so what I'm going to do now is take that brush and apply it to this. I'm going to make it not a dash line, make it a solid line, and then put that right in there. What we can do is shrink down the size of this a little bit. And we see we've now got this much more interesting and detailed line work that's following along this contour of the vehicle. This can be applied in a number of different ways. We can also go in here and tweak some of the settings in here. We can flip it along its axis and do all sorts of little tricks or techniques with it. But I love this. It's a really quick and easy way of creating these sort of like greeble-like details that are very easily repeatable and used in many different places in a design. Like we can do a real quick pass here, throwing something around the wheel. Let's scale it down to see it sort of tile itself out. And that's so cool. I love that. I love that technique. always feels cool, always feels interesting. Let me even delete this so we can see it even clearer on its own. But I love that way of having this like cool detailed line work follow along a path. So down here, this is the one I just made. It took me like 2 minutes to make that. This one took me like 8 minutes to make. I like this one just a little bit more. This is something that I wanted to bring into Cinema 4D. And so what I did was I pasted this into Photoshop so that I could use it as a texture and bring that into my Cinema 4D scene to use. So let's bring that in. Let's get a default material going. I'm going to do all the work on this material effectively just in the luminance channel and in the alpha channel. And so let's go in here. We're going to load an image. It's called Texture Strip 01. So that's in the alpha right now. And I always take a moment to look at the resolution so that I can make a card that matches that exact resolution so that I know I'm at least getting close to mapping it correctly. And let's do this. I'm going to turn off the Hummer. We're going to look at this card that is right here. And let's apply that material to it. And let's take a look and see how that's looking. All right, cool. So that's on there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to kind of replicate what we were just doing in Illustrator by using the Spline Wrap tool. As opposed to a custom brush, we're going to use the Spline Wrap tool in Cinema 4D. I put that in a null. Anything that's underneath that same null will be affected by the Spline Wrap. And I'm going to make another null that I will put this within. And in that null, I'm going to put a circular spline. I love Spline Wrap so much. I use Spline Wrap all the time to make things that look like this, where I'm taking stuff, wrapping it around a spline or a path. So easy, so awesome to use. We need a few more segments on our plane to smooth that out. We can do that. And now we've got this wrapping around a circle. To me, it takes it even more to the next level when we just play with the banking, hit 90 degrees on that, and now we've got this cool FUI hoop that's going through here. If we wanted, we could go in and we can adjust the height of this. We could, if we wanted to, we could shrink it down and even like double up how many instances of this texture are in here in how it's tiled on here. Like, let's do that. And now we're kind of maintaining the aspect ratio of the original design while getting this cool FUI hoop. Let's call this a wheel wrap, because we know this circular element will look really nice around the wheel. And I'm turning my Hummer back on. We're gonna rotate this guy right into place. Let's see if we can get this positioned right where we want it. Get this guy right in front of, or sort of centered around the wheel. And then because this is all stacked in this null order this way, we can just really easily, really quickly kind of shrink and repo this until we've got it right exactly where we want it to be. And to me, I think the way to do this where it will look cool is like we could have it wrapped around the tire, but I think it's cool to have it like a little bit offset, a little bit like standing outwards from the tire. I think that's pretty cool. I think that'll be really fun. Let's do this. Let's throw a really rad, intense color on this. When we were working on the Hummer EV, we were using lots of like intense reddish oranges as accents in key areas of the design. Yeah, look at that. That's cool. And so I've set up the Hummer EV model so that each wheel that is on the car is a instance. And so in theory, if I put that there, yeah, there we go. Now we've got hoops at all four corners. I think that looks rad. There's no light on in the scene, which is why we're not seeing this simple gray rendering of the Hummer, but that's okay, that's fine. And that will actually help with something else that we'll be able to do in just a little bit. All right, so we've got this cool line work wrapping around the wheel. What else can we do? Where else can we add some interesting line work or detail to the vehicle? So I'm gonna look at the side profile of the vehicle and say, why don't I do a spline path that kind of like wraps up and along and kind of like follows some of these details, some of these edges. I'm being a little loose and sloppy with it right now. You could go as detailed as you wanted. If you were more comfortable making spline paths in Illustrator, you could even do that and end up importing them into Cinema 4D. Just something that I do from time to time when I'm doing this kind of work. And yeah, I'm just gonna wrap this around, bring it down, and what we'll do is I'm gonna take that wheel wrap, sort of like spline wrap rig that I had created, duplicate that out, pull it out of here. Let's delete the circle that's in there. I'm gonna drag the spline in there. Let's tell spline wrap to follow that spline. And now we should have, cool. Our orange element is now wrapping over the vehicle. Let's take a look at how that's looking. That's pretty cool. I dig that. I think what we should do is we should bank this one back to the original orientation. Yeah, let it sort of like stand up almost like a digital mohawk going across the top of the vehicle. Very cool. Digging that a lot. Let's see what other kinds of elements we can put together for the Hummer EV. I want to do something that maybe is wrapped around the front of the vehicle. Think of it almost like a grill guard. Again, I'm taking inspiration from like real world elements or attributes that feel familiar. And even though this isn't going to look like a real grill guard, it's going to be a bunch of like, you know, digital, technical, illustrative work. It'll feel appropriate if it's like placed in the same area where a grill guard would appear on this vehicle. Like that will just make it work a lot better. If this was a face of a character, we would put, you know, something as like in the visor or like eyeglasses line that would feel appropriate or whatnot. So I go through that spline wrap operation. My spline wrap is currently sitting on the floor. So let's raise that guy up, get it into a position that feels kind of cool and appropriate. And I think again, we're gonna flip our banking around to tailor towards this particular element. Yeah, look at that, that's cool. And I like that we're getting this sort of like cross formation here in the front. I think that feels really fun. All right, last piece that we will do with our spline wrap is we'll make one more path that is just like what we were doing in Illustrator, where we're making a sort of like side view, something that follows the side contours of the vehicle. A little bit hard to see right now, but I know my way around the Hummer EV pretty well, so I'm gonna just roll with it and we'll follow this pathway. And it's okay if it's not absolutely perfect for right now, and you could of course adjust to your own taste when doing this on your own. Let's duplicate this guy. Let's kill that spline, drop this one in here, tell spline wrap to reference this spline, and let's jump back to our rendered view, see what we have to work with. Where is it hidden? It's probably trapped somewhere deep inside the center of the car. Let's pull it out. There it is. And it's right there. Look at that. Cool. Okay, and you know the deal at this point. We're gonna switch that banking so that it's a little more oriented towards us. And let's see how this thing is starting to look. oh, that's cool. It's like I can almost like see the car without actually seeing it. So we won't do something that's just entirely made out of these bits. We'll let some actual real passes of the car come through. But real quick, something that I want to do is put a little more emphasis on these pieces that are part of the wheels. So let's dress that up a little bit, and it's pretty easy to do. I'm gonna bring a torus in here, and I'm gonna just kind of zero it out based on these coordinates so I can get it nice and set up in there. Look at that, that looks pretty funny. All right, let's rotate our torus to 90 degrees. Let's go into our settings and get our pipe radius down to 1. Let's get our ring radius much smaller, and let's do a material that will match our orange that we are using on the greebly stuff. So we'll get that like fiery red orange color going on in here. It's like almost red, nearly maximum orange, and I think that'll look pretty tight. Let's get a nice close-up look at this. What happened? I didn't apply my color. There we go. Let's get that in there. Okay, and with an element like this, I'm just going to start like duplicating this, moving it, scaling it, and just having a few different things that are on like slightly different axes than some of the other elements that are in the scene, I find goes a really long ways towards making this simple element that we started with, this like wrap around FUI hoop, when there's just these other elements that are around it. To me, it feels really, really cool. Okay, it looks like I forgot to put that in the luminance channel, so we're gonna remedy that right now. There we go, it's already in there. I just didn't have the luminance channel turned on. All right, that's pretty cool. Maybe a little too strong in comparison to my other elements, so let's just bring the pipe radius down to 0.5, and that should make it more like a hairline. Yeah, that's cool. I like that. I don't know why, but this one just needs to be a little bit closer to that one. There we go. And I think that's perfect. That's rad. And now another thing I want to do is we've brought a little more emphasis to the wheels. I actually want to de-emphasize some of the other line work that is wrapped around the body of the vehicle. And so for this, what I had done was I took that same texture that I was using for the alpha channel, and I did make a alternate version of it, which is texture strip 2, which is a much more simplified version of that texture. So let's see here. So let me make sure I'm not messing up anything here. So this one is, which guy is this? This is, let's name these properly. This is the center wrap. This guy is the grill wrap, if I'm not mistaken. And this should be the side wrap. All right, and so in applying this simpler shape, we're gonna take a look at this and just see, yeah, slightly more simple, less detailed, a little less attention grabbing. And let's tweak the color as well. I love using orange in UIs, but sometimes it doesn't hurt to do just good old-fashioned bluish green. I try not to go overboard on bluish green, but it's a nice one to have in the mix sometimes, even though it's a somewhat typical FUI color. All right, so this is looking pretty rad, pretty cool, and I think we're getting to this point where we've got some really nice forms that are echoing and like respecting the core design of this vehicle. The next thing that I want to start talking about is how we add some visual complexity to this. And usually I find that is in rendering a lot of different passes of whatever it is that we are looking at and viewing. So we're going to render out a few different passes. Why don't we start with the pass for this line work? And this is a really fun one. What we're going to do here is we're going to actually kick on some global illumination. And let me go into both of these materials and look at their illumination settings. So let me select both of them at the same time. And we're going to turn strength up to, let's try 300% and see how that looks. And this will take a moment to kick over. Oh, I love the look of that. The way that it's just casting light onto the surface of the vehicle. Really cool effect and a great way of bringing some emphasis to this. I'm going to go into the blue one and I'm going to cut its illumination in about half. And I think that will get us a really nice balance. Now, before we actually set anything to render, we should set up our camera here in the scene. And so what I'm doing right now is setting our camera to have a pretty long lens on it. What have I got on this thing right now? Yeah, it's got a 200 focal length. Now, if I was making a car commercial, I would make, something that had shots in it that looked like this and had all sorts of crazy angles, and I love Dutching the camera just a little bit and getting something really exciting and intense. And I mean, that might even look cool in our scenario with what we are building. But to me, the true aesthetic for a camera when doing FUI is that it should be very intentionally diagrammatic, very mechanical in its view and its way of assessing the situation. It should look like a blueprint, like a diagram, like a plan view of whatever it is that we're looking at. So I like long lenses and very traditional sort of views. In this case, a 3/4 view, but it never hurts to even just do straight side view, top down view, things like that. But we'll do this sort of upper 3/4 view to almost like borderline isometric kind of view to take in the vehicle. So we'll cook that pass of our greebles illuminating the side of the vehicle, and I'm going to switch those off and start moving into some other passes that we can look at and explore. So let me just, before we get too far into that, let me just deactivate that wheel wrap, and I'm going to duplicate the geometry. This would be the perfect time to leverage the take system. My buddy Doug Appleton swears by the take system and suggests using it whenever possible in these scenarios, especially when you're intentionally making lots of different passes, which is a must do when you are doing FUI work. So, all right, what kinds of passes can we make? I'm going to be doing a lot of stylized simple passes, and I tend to do them just in the luminance channel. I'm not really concerned with how the lighting or reflections would be affecting these elements. And I'm going to use this shader, the surface tiles shader. This to me is like a hidden secret within Cinema 4D. Looks absolutely miserable right now, but we're going to go in, we're going to change the mapping to cubic, and it still kind of looks like a stupid picnic blanket or something, but we're going to go in and make all the different colors that are in here different values of gray, and I think we'll get something that's, you know, it's looking just a little bit like checkerboardy, not that interesting. However, oh, and we don't need that GI for this. Let's get that out of here. Get out of here, GI. All right. So not that interesting, but we can switch to all these different patterns that you have to choose from. We've got bricks, we've got different kinds of circles, we've got, you could do stripes, you can do all sorts of different things, but hexagons tend to be a traditional favorite of FUI artists, using hexagons throughout. Let's bring the scale down a good bit, and we start getting this nice fine pattern that's on the vehicle. I like patterns like this as opposed to just doing a wireframe. You could crack open the cell shader, or even do some cool sketch and tune stuff to get a wireframe view. But to me, I always want to try and avoid the wireframe. To me, it doesn't make sense that like aliens scanning, you know, an incoming ship would all of a sudden get access to like a perfect OBJ of that ship, right? It should feel like it's more based on LiDAR or something like that. So I think using patterns, we can get some interesting stuff going on. Now, this is feeling a little too regular, a little too boring. However, this is the button right here, randomize color. You hit that. I love the way that looks. Once you get randomized color in the mix, all of a sudden, everything has much more variation to it. I'm going to bring the brightness down a little bit, but like, look at that. That's really cool. We could play around with the kinds of colors that we're using in here. Maybe we use some like steely blues in the mix to create something that's got a little more interest to it in here. Let's even get just a sprinkle. Do you think anyone will notice any purple hiding in there? Just a little bit. They don't have to know. And we get that going on in there. I think there's some really fun stuff that can happen when we're playing with this hexagon shader. So let's consider that a pass, and we'll render that out and get that cooking and bring that into our composite. Really, this thing is going to come together in composite. It's going to be all about us mixing all different kinds of passes and layers. So for me, sometimes hexagons even still are almost a little too conventional. So I'm actually going to go back to the squares, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to crank up the size of the grout and the bevel width, and I'm going to see what happens when we get, okay, that's getting maybe a little too dark. So we're going to bring back some of our brighter elements. We'll desaturate this stuff, and what I'm effectively doing is trying to get us just like a cool pixel grid, but that has variation and noise to it that feels interesting. To take this a step further, I'm going to actually turn this into a layer shader, which is going to let me stack another shader on top of this. I'm going to go into the noise, all the awesome noise options that we have, and I know there's this like very pixel mosaic looking one. Let's play with the scale of this. Let's try 250. That feels about right. And let me go back in here. We're going to just multiply this over. And what that does is that almost takes that pixel texture and makes it look like it's like glitching out a little bit. We're going to crank up the size of this even more. Let's try 350 and see what that does. And maybe we bump the contrast on this noise a little bit more to kind of eat into this. And I'm going to say our scale needs to be even bigger. And let's see what that looks like. Cool. I think that's rad. Now it feels like we've got a pixel texture, but there's a little bit of glitch blended into it or mixed into it. I'm going to say this one is good to go to be rendered. Love it. Let's rock with that. All right. Next next pass that we can generate, almost always good to have a Fresnel pass. If you're not familiar with the Fresnel shader, it varies its intensity based on the like angle to which the surface is facing the camera. Again, we're going to do this in the luminance channel, and as dead simple as it may seem, this one is like almost perfect for me. I'm just going to kind of crank up the black knots. Let's bring that in just a little bit tighter into this and see if I can get something. Yeah, I think that's got the right amount of like contrast to it. Just a little bit tighter, a little bit more. And this pass alone will be useful for like mixing and matching with some of the other passes that we have. So let's consider that one good to go. And then let's do this. Let's create another material. This one, we're going to use the Fresnel, and let me make sure I turn off that previous pass. This one, we're going to use the Fresnel in a way where we're focusing on bringing in, letting there be luminance again, but we're going to let the Fresnel hang out in the transparency channel. I don't need any index of refraction because I'm not trying to make like not using the transparency to make something that looks like glass, but more I'm trying to create this sort of like X-ray look. So that looks way too blown out, way too strong. Let's try inverting these knots, which you can do with that really quick invert gradient command. Let's bring this in here, and I think that's getting much closer. Now we're getting something that like looks and feels like a proper X-ray. I'm digging that. Let's bring this down even more to make it a little more transparent. And then I'm going to say we can even go in here and we can try adding a Fresnel where we play with color just a little bit. And let's see what that gets us. See if that gets us anything kind of funky. Where do we end up with that? It's kind of cool. I think that could work. Let's go even crazier. Let's just go with our reddish orange blended in there and see what happens. Is that going to come out? That looks pretty cool. Let's crunch in, let the red be a little bit more dominant, and then I think we've got a cool looking pass there. A little funky, a little strange, but will give us that sense of that X-ray view. Should be awesome. All right, one more pass that is a must-have as mandated by my buddy Perception Senior Art Director Ryan Close, which is that you get a area light in your scene that is doing a really strong top-down light. I'm going to even kick the floor on for this one. Let's go back through our camera view. Let me make sure I got shadows turned on and everything. And this will give us a really intense, like really moody view of the vehicle. Yeah, and we've like adjusted the width and the size of the area light just right so that it just barely starts to kiss like the top of the tires and those edges. It catches the roof, it catches the top of the hood, but the doors slip into darkness really gently. Like, it's a really cool way to get a very dramatic sort of look out of a vehicle or many other objects for that matter. So we're gonna spit these all out and kick these all over to After Effects, where we'll have a ton of fun mixing and matching and blending these items together. All right, so here we are, one of my favorite parts of the process, going through our render passes and mixing them together to get just the right look. So let's take a look at what we've got. We've got that top-down lighting pass. We have this sort of semi-natural pass. I'm going to kind of see about maybe we multiply this on top of the natural lighting just to like crank up the drama a little bit. What else do we have? We have our transparent Fresnel pass. I'm going to set this just to kind of screen and mix in with everything else that we've got. We have our Fresnel pass, just a straight up Fresnel. Let's see, what do we do? Let's just screen that over everything else. Let's get our hex pass in there. Look at those hexagons, looking cool. Let's set that to screen as well. Then let's get our pixel grid. Drop that on top. Set that to screen. And then I think our last piece is going to be our wrapping line work. Oh, that looks so cool. Let's screen that over on top. All right, so this is what we've got. This is, these are our different passes. It's not an uncommon thing that I see when people are trying to figure out how to make futuristic user interfaces. They want to add all these different elements that create complexity. It makes it feel more sophisticated, makes it feel maybe more advanced, or like the person that's interacting with it is a total genius or whatnot. But that complexity can quickly be kind of spiral out of control into like a visual mess. And so I have this rule of thumb, which is that you want to have a few key elements that are at the tippy top of your visual hierarchy. These are either elements that are very large or very high contrast or have very saturated colors or strong luminescence to them. And then you want to have lots of other elements to create complexity and sophistication, but they should all be way down on the hierarchy. They should be much lower intensity, like, only at, up to 15% intensity or visual intensity. And then in between, in the middle, you almost want nothing in that range. You want things that are super strong, and you want things that are super knocked back and secondary. So let's see what we can do to play around with this and find that kind of path. So first thing I want to do, let's find some of our passes that have a alpha channel to them. And let's use one of these things to kind of black out everything. So I'm going to do not black out everything, but let's get our floor to be black. There we go. All right. So our floor is black, but it still has that cool luminescent glow on it. I think that feels awesome. Super excited about that. Let's see here. The Fresnel transparency. I think that's pretty cool. Wonder what we could do in terms of knocking back some of these other elements. So we have this. Let's crank up the intensity on this guy. All right, Fresnel transparency. Okay, that's bringing quite a bit of brightness here. So we're gonna tone that back a good bit. Our Fresnel luminance, okay, that's bringing an enormous amount of brightness. So I'm going to leave that off for right now. I'm going to take this hex, and what should we do with this? Let's bring it a little bit further down the stacking order and see if it still reads. See how it reads underneath that. Let me turn off the pixel grid because that's making it hard to see the hex pattern. Okay, now we get just a little bit of that hex pattern. And then the pixel grid's looking really cool. I like the pixel grid a lot, so I'm going to kind of give that a little bit of a punch by adding a glow effect to it. Let's see if this works. Might have to bring the threshold way down for the glow to pick it up. And because the pixel grid is so fine, we got to turn the radius on the glow way, way, way down and let it be much finer. Almost any time I'm adding glow to something, I add more than one instance, and the more instances I add, the more I keep increasing the radius on them. I find that gives a nice sort of like glow fall off that can work well. All right, so I think that's pretty good, but it's getting a little strong. The good news is I've got this luminescent Fresnel here, and what I'm going to do is use this Fresnel, which, let's turn that to the normal mode just so we're really reminded what that looks like. We're going to use that as a lumimat for the pixel grid. What that means is that pixel grid will only appear in those areas where the, yeah, look at that. So we're almost losing it. So let's see, maybe we bring up the contrast on the Fresnel matte. But what this will do is, yeah, now we've got the pixel grid. The pixel grid is in there, but it's limited to some key areas. And I think I'm even gonna maybe boost the levels on this pixel grid just a little bit, which is probably gonna break the glow, but that's okay. We can kind of redo or revisit the glow if we have to. Yeah, okay. So now that's feeling good. And I'll turn off the Lumimat and you'll see it's just uniformly across the car. Turn the Lumimat back on. We can maybe even come up here and kind of like tone it back a little bit here. And I think that's pretty nice. I like that we get a hint of that in here. Pixel grid, I think, needs a color wash added to it. So let's go color correction tint. And I'm going to see if I can get away with putting this above the glow. And let's see what happens when we get some blue in there. That feels pretty cool. You do, whoa, oh my goodness. You know, seeing some green in there is actually kind of cool. I'm kind of digging that look, and I wonder if there's a way we can get somewhere in green. Yeah. That's pretty cool. I kind of like that. Let's boost that just a little bit more. It's getting a little strong, but that's pretty cool, man. I kind of like the green in there. I think that's an interesting mix with everything else that we've got going on. Let's now bring some extra emphasis with some glows to these guys. These ended up coming out just a little more red than I wanted them to, so let's swing these guys just a little more towards orange country, not too far, but just a smidge. And let's get the glow happening after that is taking place. And let's see what happens when we're, what do we have to do? We got to bring the threshold down. Let's bring the radius way up. Let's get that glow going. Woohoo! That's the third instance of glow that I just duplicated. That one's probably too much. Let's get rid of that. But that's pretty cool. I'm really digging the way this is starting to come together. All right. Let's see. What else do we have in our stack that we should look at using? I'm wondering what would happen if I brought this darkening element up into the mix a little more, because I'm feeling like things are getting just a little too strong. Let's see. So this is just purely multiplied. Let me back off its intensity. You know what? I'm going to keep this down where it was. And so this hexagon pass is adding quite a bit of oomph. Let's see what happens if we set that to an overlay. That kind of darkens things a little bit. I think that's pretty cool. And I'm still feeling like there's something that we could get out of either the top down or the semi-natural pass. And sometimes having the natural stuff just kind of like overlaid on top of everything can be kind of nice. It's getting a little too much, but we just mixed just no. I'm going to get rid of that. And let's see what we can do. Let's take that X-ray view. We're going to back that off even more. And I think we're getting there. I think we're getting to a point where this feels really cool, really interesting. Gonna go back into the line wrap, tweak some of these colors just a little bit more. No, we're gonna have to do that all the way above this stuff. Let's see what happens if we actually pull a little bit of saturation out of that. Boost these guys up just a little bit more, just a smidge. And I think we're there. I think we're looking pretty good. I almost always finish off everything like this with some sort of lens flare or similar element just dropped on top of everything. Can add just like a nice bit of like atmosphere into our image. We'll see if that guy's ever going to load up for me. There it is. All right. I go in here and I keep in optical flares. Just a basic glow. I just love the way that this falls off. And we're going to screen this on. And I never ever want to see the source of a lens flare. I always want it to be kind of like out of frame. Let's see what we can do here. Let's add just a tiny bit of purple to this. Why not? And I think we've got something pretty cool, pretty fun, pretty nice to work with. I'm digging this. I think this is really cool. We could go nuts with some like magic bullet looks in here. We could keep pushing and tweaking things, but I think this piece is coming together really, really nicely. So again, I hope you can take a look at some of these techniques, some of these approaches, and not take the most like literal approach with them, but see what you can do with your own extended abilities to kind of take some of these ideas and take them to the next level using some of the other tools and components that you're familiar with to take these ideas to the next level. Thank you so much for listening. Anybody who is listening out there, don't ever hesitate to reach out and say hello. At Perception, we are always looking for new team members. If there's anybody who's interested in talking to us about joining our team or want to share their portfolio with us, do not hesitate to reach out. You can hit me on any of the social media platforms, or you can always keep tabs on what Perception is up to at experienceperception.com. We've got so much cool stuff in the works right now. We've got a ton of cool stuff that we'll be working on throughout the rest of the year and going into next year. And so keep tabs on us, follow us on all the platforms, and thank you again for taking the time to listen to me, and good luck having a ton of fun playing with my favorite tool, Cinema 4D.